Indie horror games have carved out a space of their own with some of the most freaky and memorable titles, so the best games begin with World of Horror, a 1-bit cosmic horror roguelite RPG adventure set in a small coastal Japanese town where reality unravels as old gods awaken and unspeakable creatures emerge from the darkness. You select one of 14 doomed protagonists, taking on various investigations from ghost sightings at the school, a cult beneath the hospital, a serial killer stitching up corpses together, and more, with every decision carrying consequences that ripple through the story. Manage your sanity, stamina, and health in combat using an array of improvised weapons with a meta layer of having to solve these cases as the clock ticks towards apocalypse. The dithering here is absolutely fantastic, resembling a horror manga, and is, of course, inspired by the work of Junji Ito along with H.P. Lovecraft, being visually stunning in my opinion, but the turn-based RPG portion might take a while to wrap your head around. Nightmare of Decay might not look the most visually impressive, but this is a first-person survival horror game which is essentially Resident Evil 1, throwing you into a sprawling, nightmarish manor overrun by zombies, psychotic cultists, and other horrors. You wake up with no memory of how you got there, and your only objective is to escape, although every corridor and locked door drags you deeper into the nightmare. Combat is deliberately tense, with limited ammo forcing you to think before you fire as you decide between avoidance or conflict. Scour rooms for keys, items, and secrets, with the low poly aesthetic reminiscent of PS1 era horror being very well done. This video is brought to you by EONA, a creepy horror action-adventure game where you play as the titular character, a young girl cursed both through her soul and her puppet, who must escape a sinister castle after stealing a legendary artifact known as the Puppeteer's Cross to save her sick mother. This is the lair of an evil fairy whose castle thrives on torment and where her servants stalk the halls as you navigate its towering heights, shadowed depths, and secret passages. Your curse grants you the unsettling ability to transfer your consciousness into your puppet's body while your own form remains vulnerable. Use the puppet to explore and access areas which the human body cannot get to, but beware since the castle's mistress stalks its halls in search of what is rightfully hers. And if she comes across your body, well, let's just say bad things will happen. It looks very creepy and spooky and should be a rather intense horror experience, so if interested, wishlist the game on Steam and look forward to the release in spring 2026. One of the most popular free horror games on Steam is Psychopomp from 2024, a horror first-person dungeon crawler having some scary enemy designs and a cool overall vibe and aesthetic, which has been enhanced and released as Psychopomp GOLD. The mix of old-school dungeon crawler exploration with surreal body horror aesthetics results in a very interesting world in which there are extensive catacombs and tunnels running underground, forming an extensive labyrinth below the city, which is where you are drawn to. Explore these in real time and deal with the variety of monsters, initially armed only with a hammer and have to find a way to survive. The gold version adds all new levels and areas, remastered old ones, and adds new endings, but if you've never come across the game before, I do still think it's worth a play, if only to see what a strange and interesting world the developer has created. The concept and idea behind Yuppie Psycho Executive Edition immediately has its appeal, being dubbed First Job Survival Horror, in which you play as Brian Pasternak, a fresh hire at Sintra Corp, who is tasked not with spreadsheets and coffee runs, but killing a witch, believed to have powered the company's dark success. Explore the various floors and offices in the building, interacting with everyday office objects and talking to your colleagues, where innocuous conversations mask horrifying undercurrents, as you eventually run into all sorts of horrible monsters as you uncover Sintra Corp's secrets. You need to explore to find clues and key items, using these to solve puzzles and progress forward as you attempt to accomplish your mission, but must do so before the witch catches you first. While it does use relatively simple pixel art, do not let the visuals fool you, since it can get rather bloody and grotesque, with multiple endings adding some amount of replayability, where if you're a fan of horror games, their other game, The Count Lucanau, and the upcoming Catechesis will be of interest. Zombie games are overdone, but yet there are some significant titles worth a mention, such as Into the Dead Our Darkest Days, a side-scrolling survival game set in 1980s Walton City, Texas. where you lead a desperate group of survivors attempting to stay alive in the collapsing metropolis, manage your crew of everyday people, assigning them tasks like building shelters and maintaining defenses, having to manage hunger, morale, exhaustion, and trauma, since every night brings new horrors. Scavenging runs makes you pick from your survivors to go out on missions, having to weigh the risk of combat, since more often than not, it's a better idea to avoid enemies due to permadeath, but sometimes taking the risk is necessary. Collect supplies, tools, and weapons, but be careful not to get swarmed, also having to be aware of other human survivors, since in zombie apocalypse trope fashion, the real danger is not from zombies but other humans instead. It has a pretty cool setting and look, having more in common with This War of Mine as compared to Left 4 Dead, with the emergent narratives coming out of this due to your attachment with the characters being one of the main selling points. Taiwanese developer Red Candle Games is a multi-talented team, especially with their most recent release in 9 Souls, but I want to talk about Detention here, a 2D atmospheric horror point-and-click title set in 1960s Taiwan under martial law, blending political history and supernatural dread. You play as 2 students trapped in a high school due to an incoming typhoon, discovering that the familiar building has warped into an unnatural space, one which is haunted by spirits and secrets. Explore the school, interacting with objects, solving puzzles, and hiding from spirits called the Lingered, stitching together fragmented memories in order to progress. The dual protagonist perspective is an interesting storytelling tool, along with puzzles that rely on combining items or decoding clues, which is fairly standard for an adventure game. Games are always an interesting way to experience and learn more about history, with this game talking about the White Terror period of history of Taiwan, subject, of course, to the developer's perspective, making you want to go read up more for general knowledge, but context aside, the game standing by itself is pretty good. Indie horror game fans have been eating well as of late, since horror game developers have been firing on all cylinders with events like the Steam Scream Fest and publishers like Dread XP and Blumhouse greatly contributing to the space, and such is the case with Crow Country from 2024. This is a classic survival horror title where you play as Mara Forrest investigating an abandoned amusement park to uncover its dark secrets in the year 1990, 2 years after the mysterious disappearance of its owner, Edward Crow. Theme parks and evil clowns are a central part of horror, so this is a beloved setting for lack of a better term. So you explore the creepy abandoned attractions, solving environmental puzzles, gathering key items, decoding notes, and sporadically fighting grotesque guests, managing limited ammo, and using melee weapons where required. As you explore, you will unlock shortcuts, piecing together the story via diary entries and items with an art style that almost resembles the blocky characters in Final Fantasy VII, which gives it its charm. A game which went absolutely viral is Choo-Choo Charles, primarily due to the design of the Spider Tank engine, which asked the question, what if Thomas the Tank Engine was the stuff of nightmares? This is an action horror game where you drive your own train across a small open world island, with the main goal of stopping Charles, having to first scour the island, avoid Charles or do enough damage that he backs off, then helping the residents, getting upgrades for your own train, before finally becoming powerful enough to stop Charles once and for all. Use the interlocking rail network to get around, where it's high tension all the time as Charles could appear at any time from over the next hill, so keep a lookout before disembarking on foot, exploring the island and caves, and complete quests to improve weapons and armor for your train. Use stealth to get past cultists who worship Charles, having to collect 3 eggs to trigger the final encounter. It was so popular that people started making knockoffs of this game, especially on mobile, but the original is worth a play even if it is on the shorter end of things. Developer Frictional Games is a legend in the horror game space, with an oldie but a goodie being Amnesia: The Dark Descent, a first-person horror game where our protagonist is trapped inside a decaying castle, trying to reclaim his memories and escape the darkness. Traverse winding halls, solve physics-based puzzles, light candles or use tinderboxes to stave off the darkness, and hide or flee when monsters appear. Tension remains high since you are very vulnerable, making the pace slow and surprisingly intimate as you creep through shadows, hearing distant whispers, managing your light sources, and noticing subtle distortions as your sanity wanes. Sanity decreases in the dark, which, combined with limited light resources and no means of fighting back, means that you must hide, barricade doors, or throw objects to distract the monsters while you make a hasty getaway, find notes and diary pages that reveal more of the story, and is one of those intense poop your pants kind of horror game. No list of indie horror games would be complete without Yume Nikki, one of the OG indie games in this space, which is a surreal exploration adventure game with no combat, dialogue, or traditional narrative, centered entirely on wandering through a girl's dreamscapes. You play as Madatsuki, who sleeps in her room and enters a nexus of dream worlds through doors, exploring abstract environments and collecting 24 effects that alter her appearance or open up new paths. It's about exploration as you go inspect odd rooms, interact with bizarre objects or NPCs, trigger random events, and try to piece together the story, with the surreal visual style being one of the main selling points. Granted, some people have chided this as a walking simulator, which, to be fair, it is, but its significance in the space is not to be underestimated, being about as OG as a game can get, first being distributed as freeware via the developer's website in 2004, and has had an outsized impact. Next to creepy mansions and amusement parks, the hospital or asylum setting is ripe for horror games as well, with Outlast perhaps being the best example of this, a first-person psychological horror game in which you play as an investigative journalist sneaking into Mount Massive Asylum to uncover its dark secrets. You navigate pitch-black corridors, constrained by your camcorder's night vision, which drains batteries, which means that you need to search for batteries while avoiding the homicidal patients. Like Amnesia, you are very vulnerable, being unable to attack, instead relying on stealth and hiding. The use of the camcorder night vision makes the game stand out visually, with the horrific enemy designs adding to the fear factor. This was so popular that there is a sequel, Outlast 2, which is well received, as well as the Outlast Charles, a multiplayer prequel to both of these games, which you might think would not work for a horror game, but it does, also having multiple seasons of content so far, and is a pillar in the horror game space. OMORI is a psychological horror JRPG set in two worlds, the real one and a surreal dream realm named Headspace, playing as both our main character Sunny and his alter ego Omori. For the most part, you are doing JRPG stuff such as exploring towns, solving puzzles, interacting with strange characters, and engaging in turn-based combat, but has strong psychological horror themes about anxiety, depression, trauma, self-harm, and suicide, so know that going in. Combat has rock, paper, scissors mechanics in which the emotional states of happy, angry, and sad directly counter each other, where emotional shifts then counter or amplify damage. There are multiple endings to the story depending on your choices as you uncover the truth behind a traumatic incident, with new revelations that recontextualize earlier events, so despite the relatively cutesy hand sketch look, this is a much darker tale. A newer entry is Enigma of Fear, one with an awesome visual style, mixing 2D pixel art sprites with 3D environments, where you play as Mia, a paranormal detective entering the perimeter, a realm that supposedly does not exist, to search for her missing father, who just so happens to be the leader of an organization of paranormal detectives, explore to find items and clues, piece together the mystery, solve puzzles, interact with NPC agents, and occasionally evade or confront various monsters. One interesting aspect of this game is non-linear exploration, since the perimeter is an open-ended area in which you are free to explore, tackling areas in any order, or trying another place if you get stuck. The Cult of Fear is your main antagonist as you find out more about them and your father's fate, with the direct puzzle segments being a little bit more interesting and involved than simply using a key item, and it's certainly worth a play for fans of the genre. Publisher New Blood Interactive and developer Adolf Games have somewhat of a cult-like following, with Faith the Unholy Trinity being a standout entry from them. This is a retro pixel art horror adventure reminiscent of the 8-bit era and the Atari VCS in particular. You play as Father John Ward, battling demonic forces born of occult and madness, wielding only a crucifix to exorcise possessed objects or to repel demons. While it has that retro look, some of the art and animations can actually be quite freaky, so definitely do not judge this by its cover. Explore dark forests, haunted houses, and cult temples, and piece together occult lore, being structured as 3 interlinked chapters and 1 continuous story. In some ways, this feels like a game from the 80s, especially in how your character walks from scene to scene, solving puzzles, battling demons, and advancing the story. Make choices which will determine which ending you'll get, with the Steam release adding more content and secrets, calling upon the satanic panic in North America in the 1980s, and is an example of why I love indie games, given that an art style like this can still result in a very successful game. 2024 was really a standout year for horror games, which did also see the release of MiSide, essentially the overly attached girlfriend meme the game, and is a psychological horror title that begins as a sweet home simulator before twisting into a nightmare. You live alongside the girlfriend character named Mita in an anime-inspired looking home, completing daily chores and mini-games as she just wants to be with you, where staying together makes her happy and is the best thing in the world. However, things start taking a darker twist if you try to leave, with much more sinister overtones as her affection turns obsessive. It's visual novel adventure game-ish, mixed in with first-person action as you attempt to evade the deadly affection of Mita and to stay alive. Mita will have various forms which need to be dealt with in different ways, having its appeal to a certain type of gamer who, shall we say, have a weakness for leading ladies and became one of the best-selling indie games of all time. A new entry from 2025 is Look Outside, a survival horror RPG set within an apartment building where a strange cosmic event transforms anyone who looks out the window into a grotesque monster. You play as Sam, resisting the urge to look outside while also having to find a way to survive, exploring the hallways and units in search of food, tools, weapons, and clues while managing hunger, hygiene, and your own emotional state. You will, of course, encounter these anomalies which might turn hostile, switching into turn-based combat, but is part of a trend of games which uses turn-based combat but are not JRPGs in the traditional sense, since there's no XP or leveling here. And more often than not, combat can be fatal. Answer knocks at your door and decide on whether or not to open it, since it could legitimately be a human seeking help. I love the pixel art here, with the grotesque design of the enemies being a highlight, where as of October 28, 2025, they released the Final Vision update, which brings it to version 2.0, which is on top of many free post-game updates and would rank among the best games of 2025. From the developer of Amnesia: The Dark Descent comes Soma, a sci-fi psychological horror title set in a failing underwater research complex filled with secrets and silence. You explore the dark corridors, submerged maintenance tunnels, and flooded labs while evading machines and monstrosities that believe they are human, with horrific consequences should they come into contact with you. Like Amnesia, you're vulnerable here with no weapons and no way to fight back, so it's either run or hide as you skulk around and attempt your escape. Collect notes and audio tapes to uncover more of the story as you try to learn about your past. Controversially, a safe mode was added, which retains the monsters in the game but prevents them from killing you, which some people have argued took away from the original game, which I'm not sure about since you need that element of tension, but it's true that the game and narrative is the focus, themed around identity and consciousness, being very sci-fi and perhaps more relevant than ever in the age of AI. While there is a first game, I'm putting Fear and Hunger to Termina here, since while it is technically not an early access release, it doesn't yet seem to be complete, with patches adding new areas, dungeons, enemies, bosses, weapons, full revamps of the combat system, and even new playable characters, so it's in this interesting flux and the ranking might change over time. This is a grim JRPG/survival horror hybrid set in the cursed city of Prehevel, where 14 strangers are forced into the brutal Festival of Termina. essentially Battle Royale, as they fight for survival over 3 days. You pick from 8 current playable characters and navigate a twisted open city, confronting horrific beasts, cultists, and the creeping influence of powerful old gods. When I was talking about look outside, I was referring to Fear and Hunger, since combat here is brutal with no XP leveling, having dismemberment as a system so you can permanently lose limbs, or worse, entire characters should they succumb in combat. You also have to manage hunger, sanity, and HP with an in-game clock system, resulting in certain events only occurring at specific hours. It's a direct sequel, so the first game is worth a play, but is an insanely ambitious title with interconnecting threads where the sheer brutality of combat, the grotesque enemy designs, and the generally messed up world of this game puts it among the best horror games. Like MiSide, a game that obliterates Sims, is Slay the Princess the Pristine Cut, a branching psychological horror visual novel that twists the damsel in distress trope by placing you in the role of an unnamed character who must enter a cabin in the woods, descend to the basement, and slay the princess locked inside, or else the world will end, supposedly. It's a choose dialogue options kind of game, but where the unreliable narrator is the third party in all of this, having superb voice acting and some shocking designs. Your choices affect which form of the princess you will see and deal with, where you might find yourself getting stabbed to death in first person, which is pretty unsettling, only for you to die and the loop reset, with all the encounters with the different forms of the princess leading to a grander conclusion. The Pristine Cut update adds more content to the game in the form of 3 brand new chapters, major extensions to existing routes, and a new ending, including thousands of new voice lines, illustrations, and music tracks, and is worth a revisit if you only completed it at launch. Yes, another zombie game here, but Project Zomboid is one of the most beloved and impressive sandbox simulation titles, so much so that while I usually exclude early access games in videos like this is too good not to mention. You play as a lone survivor attempting to survive a zombie apocalypse, having to scavenge supplies, fortify safe houses, farm, fish, cook and craft tools while trying not to alert the zombies, manage hunger, fatigue and stress, with a day-night cycle and weather also playing a role. Skills level up the more you use them, with traits and professions affecting skills. The level of simulation here is ridiculously impressive, where, for example, if you want to cook something, you need the raw ingredients, a heat source, and something to cook it in, like a frying pan, where adding spices can reduce boredom and unhappiness, but leave it on the stove for too long and the food will burn. Similar things applies to cars, with the different window panes being treated as individual items where you might get bitten by zombies if you forgot to close the car door properly or have a broken window, being so granular, but the developer seems to have everything covered, so I don't know when this will officially be done, but what an amazing interactive experience. From the developer of Limbo comes Inside, a dark side-scrolling puzzle platformer with horror undertones where you control a nameless boy fleeing in a dystopian world. You traverse 2.5D environments, solving spatial puzzles, hiding from guards and their dogs, swimming through flooded passages, and having to pass the obstacle in front of you to move forward. The dystopian world is hauntingly beautiful, where, like Limbo, you might just die a horrible death if you fail to solve the puzzle or get the timing right, but will just get reset at the last checkpoint to try again. As you advance deeper into the facility, you will encounter strange experiments that lead towards the climax, truly being a haunting experience that will stick with you. The sad news is that there was a blow-up between studio founders, resulting in a spin-up of a new studio making the same kind of game and various lawsuits, so I don't think you'll see anything new from this developer. But even for a game from back in 2016 and Limbo before that, these games continue to make an impact on indie horror. My favourite game of 2023 is Dredge, a fishing adventure game designed around the contradictory concept of cozy horror, in which you captain a small boat across an archipelago and discover eldritch secrets lurking in the waters. You cast nets to catch fish, occasionally running into mutant aberration versions of said sea creatures, salvage underwater relics, sell your catch to upgrade your vessel, and repeat to get a bigger, better boat. There is a day-night cycle that turns peaceful seas into nightmares in the dark, when your panic meter rises and hallucinations twist reality, where sea monsters are very real in this world. There's a central mystery to uncover of mysterious cryptic characters that seem to have an extraordinary interest in the occult as you complete various quests to help the different NPCs, unlock new areas and fresh biomes with different challenges requiring different upgrades and equipment to tackle them, with the lore from messages in bottles and diary entries being critical for your understanding of the story. They released 3 DLC in Blackstone Key, the Iron Rig and the Pale Reach, which integrates directly into the game, so the complete edition will be what I recommend if you want to check this out. The original Fear and Hunger is a YouTube and Twitch darling, with many video essays, long-form playthroughs, guides, challenges and lore videos on this, which was my first encounter with it, where I definitely appreciate the design of this game. This is a brutal survival horror JRPG where you choose one of 4 characters in Mercenary, Knight, Dark Priest or Outlander, then descend into the Dungeon of Fear and Hunger to find the imprisoned mercenary captain Lagarde, with a narrative which is basically berserk. You have to deal with horrific enemies that might dismember or kill you, also having to look out for traps and managing limited resources like torches. The turn-based combat is brutal and can end your run, say hello to the Crow Mauler for me, and just has an aura around it which tells you to stay away, but stick with it and you will find one of the most interesting games out there. It has a ton of replay value with different endings to uncover, with each of the different characters being worth a mention for its impact and how it shifted the conversation around turn-based RPGs. Speaking of oppressive atmospheres, Darkwood is one of the best made titles, a pure top-down survival horror game with an emphasis on survival, in which you are exploring a forested land by day, then barricade yourself in your base at night, fending off all comers. You scavenge for wood, nails, food and tools, repairing structures and crafting defenses, coming across strange NPCs, and having to make difficult moral choices. As night falls, survive waves of horrors, being careful about the limited amounts of resources and praying for the light of day. Unlock skills by injecting mutagenic extracts with pros and cons, with this having a central narrative and chapters to the story, where the branching choices then affects the ending you get. It is billed as being scary without having jump scares, which is true, with the horrific attacks at night being very intense, along with a mysterious story, and is a big hit. As of recording, they just announced a sequel, Darkwood 2, which is being made by the developer of Pathologic and looks to be worth a play as well. A very classically designed survival horror title is Signalis, one with a sci-fi setting telling the story of Elster, a replica technician who awakens from cryo-sleep on a desolate planet in search of her missing partner. From the outset, it draws you into a world that feels both mechanical and decayed, filled with abandoned facilities, strange signals, and the remnants of a collapsed regime. Explore claustrophobic corridors, solving intricate puzzles that often involve ciphers, keys, and radio frequencies, while also having to survive encounters with grotesque replica enemies in the dimly lit rooms. Combat is tense and unforgiving due to limited ammo and a strict 6-slot inventory system, forcing tough decisions about what to carry. The narrative and various endings are the highlight, with cryptic lore being told through notes and memory fragments, and has become the game to beat in indie survival horror. Watch this video for more of the best indie games.